Just as a reminder, everyone, this is being broadcast by YouTube.
So live?
No one's going to answer my question. All right.
Sandy, you ready?
Okay, are we ready?
Okay.
We're ready.
Let us call to order the Town of Duck Planning Board regular meeting. Wednesday, June 8th, 2022, at 6:30. I see you have some guests. Is there anyone who wishes to have a public comment? Hearing no public comments, we'll move on to the third item. I'm sorry, the third item is the election of officers. We're going to postpone that until after our new business. It'll come just before approval of minutes. Okay, so let's move to new business, which is a text amendment. What is this? Oh, it's a text amendment C-1 Neighborhood Commercial Conversational District Permit. Okay, we know what that is. Who's going to talk about it? You?
Donna's going to present on this.
Donna?
I'm going to be her backup.
Good evening, and I'm going to sit right here at my chair if that's okay with you. I'll be glad to go to the podium, but since we're good? Okay. Yes, sir. As the chairman said, this is a C1 text amendment that has been filed by Mr. Andrew Meredith. He owns property that is zoned C1 up on the north end of the town. There's a text amendment, and I'm just going to briefly explain the difference between a text amendment and a zoning map amendment just for the people that are listening to the live viewing of this. A text amendment is when you go in and you add uses to the text of the zoning ordinance, and when you do so, they apply town-wide. They are not site-specific. And as such, even though it's very difficult to avoid talking about site specifics of the applicant's property, you need to keep in mind when you make your decision tonight that it will, if you do so, to add the use that you will be doing so that it applies anywhere in the town that is zoned C1. Whereas if he was seeking a map amendment, you would be talking about his specific property, and so you could talk about the specifics of his property, but again, it's very hard not to talk about the specifics, but with the text amendment, you are applying it town-wide, so that's an important distinction in between the map amendment and the text amendment. So Mr. Meredith has applied for a zoning text amendment to add residential duplex structures to the C1 zoning district as a permitted use. As part of this text amendment, there is no definition of duplex in the zoning ordinance, so if the board is if there's a consensus of the board to be supportive of this text amendment, then you should also include a definition as part of that application process. And there are some other adjustments in the zoning ordinance that would need to be made to recognize that the duplexes were being added to the C1 text district. That would be the permitted prohibited use table in section 156.040. Mr. Meredith owns a water sports rental business, and recently, as part of some routine staff work, it was discovered that his one building that is on the site that was previously approved to have commercial on the first floor, that he had converted that commercial to a residential use. So there's a residential use on the commercial property. There was an approved second-story apartment in 2014 as an amendment to his special use permit. Accessory use structures or accessory use apartments are currently allowed in the C1, but with the conversion of that first floor area to residential, it came in to be inconsistent with the C1 because the C1 does not allow residential uses except for those accessory apartments on a second story of a commercial structure. In 2004, the town of Duck went into all of their commercial zoning districts, the C1, the village commercial, and the C2, and amended those districts and removed residential structures as a standalone use. I reviewed the minutes from those meetings as I was preparing my staff comments, and it was apparent at that time from those minutes that the intent was, since there was more residentially zoned property in the town of Duck, that it was the goal of the town to have the focus of those commercially zoned areas commercial use. And so they took residential uses out of those 3 zoning districts. There are residential uses that exist in those zoning districts, and at the time they removed those uses, they also went in and amended the non-conforming section of the zoning ordinance so that those residential structures that existed in those 3 commercial districts, if they wanted to add or if they were damaged by a hurricane, that they could rebuild and that they were not negatively impacted by the removal of those residential uses from those commercial zoning districts. There is a definition of duplex in Chapter 50 of solid waste, so if you get to the point where you're discussing this and you're going to move forward with a positive recommendation, then that definition would be appropriate to include with the text amendment to add the residential duplex structures to the C1. The water sports activities continue on the property. I'm just going through my staff notes here. In preparation of my staff work, I thought it was appropriate to go through and just see what some of the other local governments in Dare County, how they treat residential uses in commercial districts, because typically you can think of a pyramid of uses. You have residential, and then you have commercial, and then you have industrial, and usually the less intense uses are allowed in the more intense zoning districts. All of the other local governments and their zoning districts in Dare County allow residential uses in their commercial zoning districts. And so Duck is the peculiar one, or not peculiar, but the only one that does not allow the residential uses in their commercial zoning districts. All the other towns do so. I also looked at the land use plan as required by the recent amendments that the town made to their zoning ordinances. In response to Chapter 160D, you're required to make a finding of consistency, whether it's consistent or inconsistent with the land use plan, and you're also required to make a statement of reasonableness, that it's consistent with the goals and policies of the town. When you look at the policies in the land use plan, there's really no particular one that talks about residential uses in commercial districts that you could look at and say, okay, that's clear guidance for us. There are some general ones that apply, the one being policy 4.2 that reads, ensure that development of land minimizes negative direct and secondary environmental impacts, avoids risk to public health, safety, and welfare, and is consistent with the carrying capacity of the land. So there's really no specific policies on residential development. The policies on commercial development, which is policy 4.3.1, 4.3, it says enhance the character and success of Duck Village and commercial areas. And then 4.3.1 says support the development of small specialty type shops and the vitality of existing local businesses. Again, as part of your deliberations tonight and your recommendation to the town council, you will need to make a finding of consistency and reasonableness. I will tell you, as a professional reviewing those policies in the land use plan, it is my opinion that there is nothing about the text amendment that could be found to be inconsistent with the land use plan. I've given you the background of it. In looking at this and analyzing it and looking at the land use plan and the other zoning districts and the fact that the town amended their ordinance in 2004, which was almost 20 years ago, has the intent that existed in 2004 when the town made the conscious decision to remove residential uses from the commercial zoning districts. Has that changed? Certainly you have very successful commercial zoning areas now. And, based on the last time I was in this building in front of the town council reviewing the Resort Realty site plan, I would say that that maybe that intent has changed, that you feel that your commercial districts are enough now, and that you might want to revisit that. In my mind, I don't think that making this adjustment to the C1 district to allow duplex structures with a dimensional standard of 25,000 square feet, which is consistent with the duplex structures in the R2 district, that you're going to have this glut of people coming in and asking to transition their commercial structures into residential structures. I just don't think that's going to happen. I think that this is a very unique situation, and that particularly since the text amendment is just for duplex structures, I just don't see this change as being undermining that intent that was present in 2004 when the town made those amendments. I may be wrong about that, but from a professional planner standpoint, it seems to me that the impacts of this are just not that substantial. And that's my opinion. You guys know your town better than I do. And you talk to folks and you may know what your intent is and how you see things. But in my mind, I don't think that if the change is supportive and the C1 is changed to add duplex structures, that there's just going to be a lot of people coming in to do that. When you look at the zoning map that Sandy has provided to you, you'll see that there's only 3 small areas that are zoned C1. And I looked at the tax records today, and most of that C1 property is already developed with structures. There's some residential structures in the C1 now, single-family residential structures. There's multifamily structures. There's commercial structures. And so it's just, this one opportunity that he's changed to where he felt that the highest and best use of his property there was residential. And it's kind of, Dare County's kind of unique in that a lot of our areas, the highest and best use is residential, whereas in a lot of other places that aren't resort areas, the highest and best use is for commercially zoned property is typically commercial property, commercial use. So I'm going to stop right there. The applicant is here tonight. He does have Mr. Hornick, an attorney, with him, and Mr. Barnett, who submitted the application. And if you guys have any questions for me, I'll be glad to answer them now or afterwards, after the applicant has spoken.
Thanks, Donna. Does the applicant have anything to say? State your name and where you live.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm Bob Hornick. I'm with the Bro Law Firm in Chapel Hill, and I'm here tonight on behalf of Mr. Meredith, who's the owner of the property and the applicant, and Marty Barnett, who's his engineer. I think the last time I saw you was pre-COVID, so it's been a few years, and happy to be back. I really don't have a lot to add because I think Ms. Creef's presentation was pretty thorough. The one thing I would want to point out or emphasize is that having reviewed the application and the zoning map, as Ms. Creef said, there are only 3 small C1 districts in the town of Duck, so there would be, to begin with, limited effect. Those districts, it appears from the zoning map, the lots that are in the district are already pretty small lots. The districts themselves are pretty small. And the lots that are in the districts are pretty small. They don't lend themselves to significant development in the first place. Mr. Meredith operates the water sports business on the site. There's already a building there with the duplex, the duplex, with the upper floor residential unit is approved. It's the lower floor on the existing building for which, if approved, he'd be allowed to continue using that as a residential use. Mr. Meredith tells me his experience with that property insofar as commercial use is concerned is that there just did not seem to be a market for people to rent or lease the lower floor from him for commercial purposes, that he wasn't getting first of all, he wasn't getting a lot of tenants, and the tenants he had, the rents that they were paying were not economically beneficial. Well, they're beneficial to some extent, of course, but he's just not getting a return on his investment with respect to using that property commercially. So considering all the options that are available and after consultation with the planning staff, it was decided that making this request to allow duplexes, again, not single-family residential use, but duplexes in the C1 district, provided that there were at least 25,000 square feet, et cetera, for the R2 district regulations, would be an appropriate request to make of the town. And we would hope that the planning board would favorably consider and recommend this to the town council so that we could move forward with the process. And Mr. Barnett and Mr. Meredith and myself, we're here to answer any questions that the board members might have.
I'm sorry, what size is the property again?
It's about an acre.
It's well over 25,000 square feet. And I would just add, and I forgot to mention this when I was speaking earlier, if the amendment is approved by the town council, then Mr. Meredith would have to come back in and have his existing condition or his special use permit amended to recognize that it is the duplex structure that it's.
Correct.
Would have to follow up with that.
Okay. I remember that building when it was supposed to have somebody selling ice cream or something in it.
Exactly.
And tell me what happened there. I mean, is this something that you're not interested in now?
She needed more specific. I think it was a grease trap or something. For the ice cream shop. Yeah, she couldn't get. I don't know. You would probably remember more than me, but that's.
Say your name first.
My name's Andrew Meredith.
Okay.
Yeah, he's the owner of the property.
Right.
And the ice cream shop had some difficulties getting environmental health approval because it needed a grease trap.
Needed a what?
A grease
Grease
trap.
trap.
Oh, okay.
And they didn't have further. I don't remember exactly, but she wasn't approved to do what she wanted to do there. And I ended up renting it to a painter for a few years, but at a fraction of the rents that I need to cover the expenses of the building.
Okay.
Was there a coffee shop supposed to go in there as well?
It was going to be a coffee shop / ice cream
Okay,
shop.
both the same, okay.
Mr. Meredith, actually, and Mr. Hornet, we typically ask people who speak before us to give their name and address. So if you could give us your address.
Okay, I'm sorry. Andrew Meredith, it's 1446 Duck Road. Or 1448, I guess is
The tax parcel says 1448.
Yes.
The property actually lists 1446 on the building for the mailbox.
I think that came up a couple of years ago when you were before us. As I remember.
Yeah, I've always called it 1446. I don't know if it's two addresses. I think it might be,
It's a single, it's
it's just 1448.
1448. That's the tax parcel address.
Wrong.
My address is 1526 East Franklin Street, Suite 200, Chapel Hill.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll discuss this.
Could I ask another question, please?
Randy, go ahead.
Who's living downstairs now?
I'm using it as a vacation rental.
Vacation rental? Okay. And upstairs, is that being used for,
That's a vacation rental.
both of them are?
Well, yeah.
Is it Airbnb or, okay.
All right, I have a follow-up question.
Joe, can you please pull your hand away from your mouth?
I still heard it talking.
This makes it difficult.
Have you done anything with parking? Has that been a problem? Do you have a specific number of places associated?
That also kind of plays into the residential parking needs are much less than for a commercial space. So I do prefer to keep the parking for the water sports that I operate there. So I'll have much less parking need with a residential use than a commercial use.
And that would also all be addressed when he were to come back for his amendment to his conditional use permit, we would go through all the parking requirements
Right,
if this were approved tonight, or recommended for approval.
thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question. Excuse me. You may have said this, and I might not have heard it, but at the time you had to make the decision to convert to rental or residential rental, did you realize you needed to get, you weren't authorized to do that you needed
No,
some kind of a waiver to change your
That was under
business?
I'm sorry, I was under the impression that commercial could be used as residential, but residential couldn't be used as commercial. But I didn't, I definitely didn't think that it was an issue to use a commercial property as residential. I thought that was allowable.
And I will add to that as soon as I brought this to Drew's attention, he was immediately working to resolve it with us.
I have a few logistical questions, probably more for staff than you guys. So the language in the amendment says that it would be permitted by right. My understanding is that Drew personally would have to come back because he has an existing special use permit, but in the future, it could, at a different location, it could be approved by staff administratively. Is that correct?
If it was a vacant piece of property that was 25,000 square feet and someone wanted to build a duplex, then yes, that would be by administrative approval.
And if we didn't want that to be administrative, if we wanted it to be a special use, we would change the letter in the table, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And then I see the C1 district north of the Village Table and Tavern, that's condos, correct?
Yes, that's
Portside.
the Portside condos.
This text amendment would apply to that district, but condos are defined differently than duplexes, or are those condos grandfathered because they were there before this change happened?
I'm assuming that they're grandfathered,
Right.
that they, when the amendment was made in 2004, that those non-conforming ones would have addressed that as well.
Okay.
Because when Sandy and I first started talking about this, there was discussion about, well, does it need to be multifamily? And my response was, if he has a duplex, then put it in as a duplex, and not realizing at the time that there were condos in the C1. And so.
I mean, condos would have a different implication for like
Yes.
sale as a portion of the,
Yes.
and that's not what we're talking about. But the only reason I ask is because 1/3 of the C1 district already allows multifamily housing.
Yes, yes.
And that's not by right, that's grandfather.
Yes.
Correct.
Okay,
But, yeah, you couldn't, condos can't be built in Duck anymore.
right. But it's still
Except
the
that
same,
they're not
as far as a use, it's multifamily use, and we would potentially be approving another multifamily use in the same district.
Well, I think the important distinction is that from, it's cleaner if you put a duplex in there. In my mind, this was my thinking, I'll give you my thinking. A duplex is a one or two single-family structures are handled under the residential building code versus the multifamily.
Yeah.
And so if you went in the zoning ordinance and added multifamily in response to him, when in fact he doesn't have a multifamily structure, he has a duplex, that it was awkward.
Right.
And so I thought it was cleaner, and we had a conversation with Mr. Hurd, and he agreed with my analysis, and Sandy was comfortable with that, and the applicant was comfortable with that. That's why it's proposed as a residential duplex and not multifamily.
Okay, thanks.
Anyone else?
Yeah, and I would assume, excuse me, I would assume that non-conformity clause that's in for residentials that are in C1s would also be applicable to the townhouses at Portside? Okay.
I have a couple of questions, Donna. perhaps Sandy. I think that the definition is sort of loosey-goosey
The definition of duplex?
of duplex, yeah.
So we, rather than trying to create a definition, we identified duplex in our town code,
Yeah.
and we took it directly from that.
I understand, but if we're looking at we're looking at a text amendment to give further clarity and definition, and I just think it's sort of loosey-goosey.
In what way?
Well, in most jurisdictions, duplexes are clearly defined, and it's not, they're generally two single-family properties that are joined together, as opposed to building two separate single-family properties that, under this definition, I think you could call it a duplex, that are separated.
I mean, I think that the intent here is that this is a single structure.
I know what the intent is, but that's not what it says.
And so if you want to modify the definition of duplex, you can certainly do that and just add language that says, a dwelling place that's under one roof that's separated vertically or horizontally.
My only point is I think it's sort of
That's-
loosey-goosey the way it is
right.
now.
Some of the other zoning ordinances that I'm familiar with have that distinction in there that it's for two dwellings under one roof, that it's either vertically or horizontally separated.
Yeah. Did you give any thought to parking and parking stipulation for the duplex? And a similar question with regard to the relationship, probably in square footage, of the duplex to the commercial uses on the same site.
Again, text amendment, site-specific. If the text amendment is approved, then the issues of parking will be discussed at the time his special use permit is reviewed. To answer your general question about whether there was thought given to parking, the language is such that if it's added into the C1 and someone comes in to build a new duplex on a vacant piece of property, then the parking standards that apply to duplexes or to single-family, one space per bedroom or whatever it is, that those would be applied. He shouldn't, as he said, he shouldn't have an issue if he comes forward with his special use permit, because commercial parking is going to be at a higher standard than residential. So, but yes, there was thought given to that. That's why there's no need for additional language in there about parking, because it's already addressed in the ordinance.
And the second part of my question about the size of the duplex in relationship to the commercial uses on the same site?
No, sir, again, I was thinking in purely strict terms of C1 amendment duplexes and not what was going on Mr. Meredith's site-specific property. So I think that, if you're concerned that someone is going to come in who has a commercial property now and wants to transition an existing structure to have it as a duplex, then you would need to consider language that says if existing property, to have whatever it is that you may want to address. I'm going to say that the standards in the zoning ordinance for commercial group developments or for group developments are probably going to address those concerns. It's going to address the separation of the units. It's going to address the setbacks from the property lines. It's going to address the lot coverage. And so that's going to be covered by other sections of the zoning ordinance, and that there's no need to have it as part of this text amendment now.
You don't see any ambiguity? That's just a question. You don't see any?
No, sir, I do not. I think that between Sandy and I, we would have picked up on that. I mean, we went through the ordinance, and the table needs to be changed. The duplex, the definition is not there. I think the group development would catch everything else. And again, I don't think that there's going to be people standing in line to do this. I think this is just, maybe 25 years from now. But I think it's a very limited thing. 25,000 square feet is a pretty big requirement for a duplex, and probably some of the existing commercial sites out there may not even be 25,000 square feet anyway.
I can tell you that some of the ones that are adjacent to this property and others in the C1 district are certainly not.
Or smaller, yes. I checked them this morning, and one was 22.5, I think, and one was 18.
And something else that we didn't really mention in the staff report is these are all sound side properties, so they also, in addition to having our zoning requirements, they also have state CAMA requirements that are going to limit that development capability because of the CAMA regulations. If you're concerned with redevelopment or people demolishing a residential structure to put a duplex.
And then the flood rules are going to apply too. And so that's going to be a big prohibitor right there for someone coming in who may have a single-family structure and think that they could come in and enclose the bottom and turn it into a duplex. That's going to be extremely difficult with the base flood of 10 or 12 feet, whatever it is.
10 feet.
10 feet.
All right, anyone else have any questions for
I
you?
had a technical question to ask concerning if the 156.04 permitted and prohibited use table, it's got down there X for R2, and looking into the zoning book, it looks like duplexes are allowed for R2. Is that a miscalculation, or is that one that requires special approval?
She's going to check the ordinance.
I'm sorry?
She's going to check the ordinance, yeah, to make sure, and it may be a typo.
And the reason I started looking is because some of the examples were talking about R2 zoning district when they were talking about the size of the duplexes, so I went back and checked it, and if I'm reading it right.
They were called out in S1. Duplex was called out in S1.
Where do you see that?
The S1.
I did, but I'm looking up R2.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
The
What I said,
zoning.
Yeah.
It was in S1,
Yeah,
yeah.
S1 is permitted, but I'm also asking, is R2 permitted?
R2 does allow duplexes. I think the table may be wrong.
Well, yeah, or I copied it wrong,
Yeah.
possible. It is permitted use in R2.
So where it's in the staff memo, that's wrong. It needs to be a P there instead of an X.
So in both examples, R2 should be permitted
Yeah.
Correct.
on page 4 and the attachment C.
Okay.
So that is a typo on our part. That should be P. C1 is where you would cross out the X and add the P.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Good eye.
The kind of a bigger question is, we're tonight considering changing the residential authorization for C1, and in 2004, it was specifically changed to reduce residential for the benefit of the commercial establishments. I'm uneasy about making that recommendation for a change if I don't know if we know what the businesses in C1 feel about this proposed change we're doing. I mean, we're on the verge of making a change based on the fact that we found a mistake in one of the businesses and not knowing what the commercial establishments feel about that.
Well, before the amendment could be adopted by the town council, there would have to be a public hearing, And so it would be advertised, and I'm assuming that this meeting was advertised as well.
And it's not like this is going to negatively impact the commercial businesses or commercial properties. It's just giving them an opportunity, if they chose, to add some residential use.
Generally, when you allow a property owner to do more with their property, they're happy about that.
Well, I was just reading what they said. The decision that was made in 2004 went in the direction of
Right.
removing residential, and now we are on the verge of putting that back in place.
Right, and when I read the minutes, again, reading minutes are not the same thing as actually sitting through all those discussions
Right.
that they had, and they were done in context of other changes. So it wasn't that they went in and that was the only amendment that was made in 2004. It was made as a part of a group of, or a component of some other amendments. And what I gathered from reading those minutes was that there was some consternation by the planning board and the town council at that time about the impacts of making that change, and then they came in with that non-conforming language. If I remember correctly, there was, the planning board made a recommendation, and then by the time it got to the town council, some of the individual planning board members who owned property that was commercially zoned and had a house there came in and said, you know what, I don't think that I'm okay with this now. I don't think I understood the ramifications. And I will tell you that from a planning standpoint, anytime you go in and you take away or diminish the uses that are allowed for someone, it's very, it doesn't happen that frequently. And quite honestly, when I went back and was doing my research on this and realized that the residential uses had been taken out, I was surprised by that, because that's not typically what happens. Usually, every commercial district allows residential uses just because. And so again, I just don't see this as a big deal in the overall scheme of duck zoning, particularly since it's very narrow in scope in that it's a residential duplex structure on a 25,000 square foot lot, and it's not single family, and you're doing it solely for the C1 and not the C2 and not the village commercial, the village commercial being the main zoning district, the commercial zoning district in the town of Duck. I think maybe if you were doing it for the village commercial, then it might be, reason to give pause but again, the town council is going to have their say, and they might have more privy, but I see you shaking your head, and that I did read those minutes correctly, and that was an accurate discussion at that time.
I do agree, and I got the same connotation out of reading those minutes, and it was actually two members, if I remember correctly, on the planning board that came back and tried to get that extracted from council before a vote was done through the liaison to the planning board, because if they realized that in the way that it was written, that if their house burned down or there was damage over 50% of that, then they could not rebuild that house and it would be lost. And they were thinking that one day I may want to expand my house, and under the verbiage that they had, they would not be able to do that.
And again, if I was a property owner and I had a house in the C1, I would feel much more comfortable with it being a permitted use than having to rely on non-conforming language that sometimes can be left to interpretation by whoever's reading.
Very true.
Somewhat as a follow-up to Tim's question, the route of the text amendment generally does not involve as much community input as just going at it frontally. Our recent experience with the town council, when there was a proposal for a text amendment, the town council sought community input. Was any consideration given to seeking community input here?
Well, there will have to be a public hearing at the town council.
No, separate from the public hearing. I'm not sure if you were involved in, Donna, but
No,
the
she
town
was not.
council
Yeah.
sought community input, and it was as a result of the community input that was for indoor recreational uses. And I dare say that the community input was very different than what the staff was considering and had recommended. And that influenced sort of everybody going forward. So my question again is, has any consideration been given to getting a sense of community input?
So there's a distinct difference between the indoor entertainment zoning text amendment and this zoning text amendment, in that that zoning text amendment was going to be applied to the VC district, which was a much larger district.
Yep.
And I believe it may have, Mark can maybe correct me if I'm wrong, may have even been for all of the commercial districts. I can't remember exactly.
Most of the C2 allows indoor.
But no, we didn't. This is a very small district, and as Donna has emphasized, pretty innocuous. But that can certainly be done if council wants that to happen. We've got it advertised. It went in the paper. It's on the website. It's been posted in the town administrative building, and that will all happen again as well, because this is still going to have to go to council for approval for a public hearing, and then it would go to council. So we'd be looking at going to a council meeting in July just to approve it for advertising, and then it would go to August. So there's still a two-month process that would allow for public input.
Since it's been brought up, I'd also like to point out that what council did in that instance is not part of the procedure that's outlined in the ordinance. I think that it was a pretty irresponsible move on their part, especially because the sample that came back was by no way representative of the entire town. Generally, when you ask for public comment, negative comments will outweigh any positive comments. And for some reason, stakeholders that are not property owners in Duck were asked in that instance to pile on, making the number of comments look rather significant when I believe the number of comments from actual Ducktown residents were under 100. So, and then council went ahead and made a move based on comments from a non-representative sample. If our town government was set up in such a way that every decision was to be put to a popular vote, that would make sense. But since the procedures in the ordinance don't outline that, since the stakeholders who are only given the procedures in the ordinance before they come before the board and council have no expectation that their request is going to be tried in the court of public opinion, I just wanted to go on the record as saying that I don't think that was a representative sample, and I was really disappointed in seeing that move from council.
And I would just add that it's always a good practice to follow what's in your ordinance, because once you start straying from that, if you don't do it every single time, there's that expectation. So you follow what's in the ordinance, there'll be plenty of opportunity for people to come in and have their input. And that's what the law is. You know, that you advertise it. With the text amendment, it's difficult to post the property like you do with the zoning map amendment. And so, but, you know, with Duck being the town that it is, I feel fairly certain that there'll be plenty of community involvement and notice and knowledge of what's going on.
Hopefully. I'd like to add one other thing about when we were talking about the amendment back in 2004. I think that amendment was written with no foresight, and I don't think anybody had any foresight as to this pandemic, COVID, this beast coming through, and what the negative impact that would have on commercial properties.
Right.
And I think if you look at planning boards across the nation, they're having to address situations where their commercial buildings no longer are being used, and they're adopting these into residential uses, so the building does not sit there and just waste away. Plus, it's advantageous to the community because it is bringing in revenue, because people are living in there, and it is boosting their businesses. So it is having a positive effect rather than just leaving. And I think that should be recognized, that it's happening all throughout the United States.
And that's why you have procedures to allow for amendments to ordinances, because situations change, times change. This is almost 20 years after it's been changed. And, you know, a lot of times after you make big amendments like that, when people come in and let's say it's 1 year or 2 years, you're always hesitant to go in and tinker with it because the intent is still probably the same. But in this instance, I think it's probably safe to say that there has been a change in circumstances, if nothing else, other than the market forces as a result of that.
Yeah.
And I think when we think back to 2004 and we think about some of the other communities, you know, we were seeing a lot of commercial properties in Kildover Hills that were being demolished and being redeveloped with, you know, 6, 8, 10 single-family dwellings. And I believe that was, having been there, that was part of the intent, is that there was a fear that somebody was going to come in and buy a bunch of commercial property and then redevelop it as residential, and that hasn't happened. You know, the commercial districts have been pretty stable and have thrived, and they continue to do so, with the exception of, you know, obviously some impacts from COVID, several impacts from COVID.
They've been more stable here than elsewhere, though.
Yes.
Yeah.
They're more limited
It's not
here.
likely that somebody's going to come in and demolish one of the developments in here and
They're-
put
yeah,
up a
they're
bunch
small.
of
Yeah.
residentials. It's not, I just don't see that happen, because that's part of what Duck is.
Yeah.
The staff analysis that came up with virtually all the counties and most of the cities have residential use allowed in commercial districts. Would you say that Duck does too by having accessory apartments? Do any of these other cities, is that the extent of their residential?
Most of them allow accessory dwelling units of some sort. I was checking specifically for duplexes and single-family uses when I did that research, but typically they allowed single-family duplexes. Some of them allowed mobile homes. The county allows mobile homes in their residential districts, some of them, and they allow the accessory dwelling units. So there's a shift to allow. I'm just from following local politics the last 2 or 3 years. All of the towns have made amendments to allow accessory dwelling units. So I think the fact that that accessory apartment is already allowed in the C1, that also helps support this, and that there's already a residential use there. It's not a complete prohibition of residential uses.
Well, also you have your major and your minor businesses, or the homes,
Right.
occupational desks that are allowed. And that's a resident.
You guys done? Gentlemen, anything else between us?
Any other questions?
No. Any other questions?
Pardon me?
Any other questions?
I have no other questions.
Would you entertain a motion?
I would.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the text amendment as drafted with the noted correction to the table that Tim pointed out, that we need to replace that X with a P in the RS2 district as well.
That's on page 4.
It's on page 4 and in the actual proposed, or I guess attachment C.
Attachment C.
Yeah, page 4 and attachment C.
Do I hear a second?
I second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Conversation?
Hey, one thing I would question, and Donna, Sandy, where we have in what's the recommended verbiage there, the intent, and we put the maximum density shall be 4 residential dwelling units, would that be better placed being down on the permitted uses where we talk about duplexes, and then put that verbiage right behind where it says residential uses there, and say the maximum density would not exceed residential, 4 residential units? Is that a better place for it, or it seemed like to me it could be cleaner?
I struggled with that myself, about
Yeah.
why is that there?
So I think that was consistent with one of the other, with the R2.
The R2.
District.
Okay.
Yeah,
And the way it was laid out in that section, and that's why we put it there.
Yeah, I didn't look at that, but it just seemed like it would be cleaner down the bottom, but.
I'm just gonna, let me just, if you give me a second.
a lot of the intent statements often state right out what the maximum dwelling density is, and so I think that was just a matter of consistency, is the why that staff has put it there. We can certainly put it in A and B if you think that would be helpful.
Okay.
But for reference, the R2 district does have the intent, and then it goes, you know, Section 1, R2 district is intended to encourage development, yada, yada, yada. Then number 2 says the maximum density shall not exceed 6 dwelling 8 units per acre. So that's how we kind of guided this language in conformity with the other districts. But it's, you know, it's at your discretion. It would just be more consistent with the R2 layout.
I would suggest it be left alone. Would you like to change that?
No, I mean, that's fine.
Okay,
I was
just a question.
That was a question that I had.
All right.
I would suggest, though, that we do, the C1 district is established primarily to encourage, et cetera, as 1 under intent, and then 2, the maximum density, so it's just a little more clear.
Okay.
Don't intend to have 2 entries.
I'm good with that change.
Okay, you're good with that change? You remember what it is?
Do I need to enumerate the whole thing again?
Just make sure
I'm
it
going to need
gets
some
into
help.
Yeah, enumerate it.
Okay.
Go.
So I'm amending the motion to approve the text amendment as written with the corrections previously mentioned on page 4 and attachment C under section RS2, along with the additional changes noted to the intent statement.
Okay. Everybody gets that?
Second.
And the motion's been seconded. Any other conversation? James, nothing? Nothing? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
No ayes. Passes, 5-0.
5, everyone was an aye?
Yes. Okay. Very good. We'll move on now. We'll move on to what was going to be the election of officers, which is, so long, guys, thank you, which is item 3. And we're putting that now before the approval of minutes. Therefore, as you know, every year we have to elect officers and vice chairman. You also remember, last year I said that I would not run for chairman again, that it's time to give that to somebody else. So,
That was actually in 2020.
pardon?
That was actually in 2020.
It was?
Yes, it was.
Oh, you write those things down? That's right, we had a big skip there. Yeah, okay. Well, anyhow, that's what I said. I mean, I've been chairman for about 10 years, so it is time for someone else to take over.
Mr. Chairman, would you entertain a motion?
Who was that?
That was me.
You.
Mark.
Yes, I would.
I'd like to nominate Randy Morton for the position of chair.
I would accept
Second for
that.
that?
I would second that.
Second, huh? Okay, conversation? Hearing none?
What, are you going to, I nominate James Cofield.
Well, we have a nomination on the floor right now. We need to get rid of that first.
Oh, I thought we could put a slate of nominations in.
That's up to you guys.
How does that work?
Yeah, how does that going to work if we do that?
Well, I think everybody that is interested in running needs to be presented, and then the five-person board vote, and whoever gets the most votes wins and is the chairman.
I have no objection to the way you want to do it.
You can speak into the mic when you...
I have no objection to the way you want to do it, if you want to do that. I don't think it's necessary.
I don't know that, in my reading of the bylaws, I don't know that it's laid out.
I don't think it's laid out specifically that you could do it either way, but I think we probably could.
It can be done either way. Actually, the town council entertains nominations and then the vote.
Oh, okay.
But, it can be done either way. The end result
Well,
will be the same.
you want to do it that way?
I didn't hear what James said.
James said it is okay to do it that way, considering that the council even makes similar moves in that direction.
By doing it the way you propose and the way Mark
Yeah.
proposed. The end result is the
Either
same.
way.
I mean,
Okay. So do we vote then? Just, we say the name of the person we're voting for?
I still think we need to discuss that. If you have two people waiting to nominate a candidate, it shouldn't be that the first person that makes the nomination more or less wins or gets the advantage. So I think we ought to nominate to get the full slate and then discuss it if we like and then vote.
Right. Well, I think we just said we'd do that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I didn't hear that.
Yeah.
Well, then I nominate James Cofield.
Is there a second?
second.
Okay.
You seconded?
Great.
All right, so it's been nominated and seconded that James Cofield and Randy both would like to be chairman, or could be chairman, or will be chairman.
So
I move that the nominations be closed.
Okay.
I'll second that. All right, nominations have been closed. No discussion?
If there is some discussion, could I have a moment?
We just said there was no discussion because
Well-
you didn't say anything.
It was different.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
So, I just wanted to clear the air, regardless of what the vote comes out to be. But what I have heard, and it bothers me a little bit, is that there's been some talk around that I would not be qualified because I had not been on the planning board for that long. So I wanted to address that because I had no one speak to me and tell me what qualifications that meant. I would not be qualified. And the reason I say that is that I look at this position as the board has 5 voting members, and then one member has some additional responsibility, and that is to facilitate the planning board meeting. And through that facilitation, it's coordinate with any applicants, with town staff, whatever entities are there. And just like to point out is in my last, on the end of my professional career at Capital One, I was what they call was an agile coach, but the purpose of the position was I had responsibility for the implementation and the development for the credit card system to put into production. 50 million customer credit card system. And my responsibility was to communicate and coordinate with all the parties involved to keep everybody directed to actually facilitate that whole implementation. And so I just bring that up in that if it's I don't understand, and again, why I was not looked at as being qualified, but if it's longevity, I think as far as the chairman is concerned, it's not a longevity thing, it's a skilled thing, and that's not to say I'm any better than what James is. The only thing I point that out is I had heard that was going around, and nobody addressed that, and I think in the future, in these situations, we probably ought not to have that occur. That if there is some disqualification there, put that out there and let somebody know why it's viewed that they're not qualified or not experienced enough. So that's all I had. I just wanted to clear the air on that.
Mr. Chairman, I'd also like to point out that the reason that I nominated Randy is because I think that he has the demeanor to facilitate the meetings, and I do feel like James is valuable as a board member because he takes the applicants to task on the details of their applications. But I feel like in running the meeting, in the past, I started on the planning board in 2013, and it started out as a very collegial environment where we were working together with the applicants and staff to come to conclusions that worked well for the town. And I do think that Randy's better suited for that. So that was my reason for making the motion.
Thank you. Anybody else? Let's move ahead then. One by one. Those in favor of Randy, please say aye.
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 That was an aye?
Yes, that was an aye.
That was an aye. Okay. Those ayes are not enough. All in favor of Mr. Cofield, please say aye.
Aye.
Mr. Cofield has 3 ayes. You are the new chairman.
Thank you. My comment is I'd like for all of us to recognize and congratulate Joe on his tenure as chairman of the planning board. Joe has done, I think, a very good job for the planning board, for the town, in his capacity as chairman of the planning board. Secondly, I thank you for your vote of confidence in my election as chair. And I have some pretty big shoes to fill following Joe in office. And thank you, Joe. I think it's easier to make the transition if Joe sticks around. And the best way I can see him sticking around is as vice chair. And so I am quite pleased with the work that Joe has done over the years for the planning board. And if you concur, Joe, I nominate you as vice chair of the board.
Okay.
My nomination is for Joe Blakaitis as vice chair of the board.
I'm not the chairman anymore. You got to talk now.
Oh, well, it takes effect immediately? Okay. Joe Blakaitis has been nominated as vice chair of the board. Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
Joe Blakaitis has been nominated, and there is a second. Any questions on the motion? Hearing none, I'll ask for the vote. All in favor of Joe Blakaitis as vice chair of the board, please signal by saying aye.
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 What do we got?
It's 5.
All right. Okay, mark it down.
James, I would disagree with you on one thing that you said right there about Joe. You said he served a very good, or did a very good job. I would say he did an outstanding job. So
I'll take that as
I'll
a friendly
disagree with it.
amendment.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
So we'll now move to item number 5 on the agenda, which is the...
So I
Oh, I'm sorry,
believe
Sandy.
you had a question previously about whether or not planning board members needed to be sworn in.
Yes.
And we did in this past few days confirm with the School of Government that does in fact have to happen.
I thought so.
So we have Deputy Town Clerk Kay Nickens here, and she is going to swear you all in.
Everybody?
Everybody?
Oh, okay.
I mean, everybody gets sworn? Oh, interesting. What do we do? Stand up. Don't say nothing, just stand up.
All right, so raise your right hand, and after I give the oath, say, "I do" or "I swear." I do hereby solemnly swear that I will support and maintain the Constitution and laws of the United States and Constitution and laws of the state of North Carolina, not inconsistent therewith, and that I will faithfully and impartially discharge the duties imposed upon me by law as planning board for the town of Duck, North Carolina, so help me God.
I do.
Do we have to raise our hands?
Yes. But we never did that before, did we?
No, but it was part of the amendment that we passed about 2 years ago.
Wow.
Part of the bylaws, isn't it?
Yeah. Thank you, Sandy.
Well,
Item number 5 on the agenda, approval of the minutes. The minutes have been presented. Any questions, comments on the minutes?
For prior last meeting.
none.
The minutes for the, what date was that?
April 13th.
April
April
13th.
13th.
I move to approve the minutes for April 13th as written.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and properly second that the minutes be approved as written. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. It's done. Staff comments.
So I know the agenda says that I was going to do a summary of the town council meetings, and I forgot to put that together, other than
Sandy, we're not going to hold that against you.
Wing it.
the May 2nd meeting. I know that several of you were there. They voted to deny the Resort Realty special use permit. Outside of that, the night was a blur because that was 5 hours. Then at the June 1 meeting, they adopted the budget for this fiscal year, and they also authorized us to advertise for public hearing for the change to the elevation certificates, which was presented to you all a couple months ago. It was delayed getting to council because of the Resort Realty package. I think that's probably the most important things that you need to know.
And there was some noise. Talk about noise, right?
So we have a gentleman that lives up on Wampum that's not happy with the delivery trucks that are delivering ice and the noise that they make when they throw them out of the truck. And council considered possible revisions to our noise ordinance, possible revisions to prohibiting delivery trucks in certain hours. And in the end, I believe they chose not to do anything. And, we are unique in that there are certain things that don't happen here that happen elsewhere. Like our trash trucks don't start till 6 in the morning. It used to be 7. Other places it's 3 and 4 in the morning. So I think that they, it was a single instance, and we have other single instances, and you can't
Single out.
legislate based on that. So I'm pretty sure they made a good decision there. Project updates. The budget was adopted, so there's going to be more to come. We're still working on the brick project. We're still waiting on approval or an award from FEMA. We are actively working on obtaining easements, mostly temporary construction easements from the impacted property owners. I do expect that the permitting with CAMA is in the works. And so as soon as we actually find out that we've gotten the money, you'll start hearing a lot more. Beach Nourishment has begun.
Sandy, when do you anticipate that would be?
We anticipated it back in January. So we just got another message from the state requesting a few items that I'm hoping we're going to be able to clear up and get back to them tomorrow or late this week, early next week. I haven't actually looked at their request, But I know we're meeting with VHB tomorrow to actually like walk the site, talk about some things that may or may not have come up. Like, for instance, we've been meeting with people and someone asked me, what about the tree canopy? And I'm like, well, that's definitely going to have to be limbed up because when you raise the road 3 feet, right now we're meeting a 14-foot clearance, that's going to need to change to a 17-foot clearance from the existing grade because there's, kind of get the picture. But we're actually, working actively on trying to get this resolved and in the works. Beach Nourishment has begun, not actual pumping of sand, but they are mobilized and getting ready to start pumping sand in Kildover Hills come Monday. We're still expecting they're going to be mid-September before they get here. And that nor'easter that hit us the first week of May created a lot of scarping in the Nourishment area. We have finished grading that so that people can start walking down the accesses again. They are difficult, but we're 4 months away from Nourishment, so we're going to work with people to try and make sure things are good enough for them to get down to the beach. And if they can't get down to the beach, Surf Rescue will help them. We also are finishing up, cleaning up all the debris that resulted from the nor'easter, and hopefully that will be the last time this year we have to do it. Hopefully. And that's all I got.
That was a dumpster?
That was the dumpster, yes. Oh, and I would just like to thank Kay for these minutes because I think, what are they, 17 pages? And then you can probably thank Lori next time you see her because the council minutes from the May meeting are 45 pages.
Sandy, why did they tar that road up there by today?
If you don't travel north very often, and you do, I'm not sure why you didn't notice all the potholes that were repeat offenders. And there were enough complaints from Sanderling, I'm sure, to make that happen.
He's just got a smooth riding vehicle, so he didn't have to hit him.
Yeah, it was becoming very bad. To the point wherever,
So it was
whenever
only,
rained,
it was only for that section that they had a lot of.
It was only that section. There's been, it's one of the areas that is low and has some standing water when it rains heavily. And repeat repairs were not getting the job done. So
Right. I'm sure everybody,
while DOT does something nice.
I'm sure everybody approved of that because they can go faster now. Guaranteed.
Moving right along, board comments. I'll start off by making just 2 very brief comments. Again, thank you for your confidence in my leadership. 2, and I made the same expression twice when I was appointed to the planning board, and I'll make it to all of you, and that is that fairness is my guidepost in life. And you can expect that from me as chairman of the planning board. Other comments?
I'd like to thank everybody that worked with me, for me, and against me and everything else on the 10 years that I've been here as chairman and 5 years before that as vice chairman again. Especially Sandy, who was always there to give you hell if you did the wrong thing.
If you don't talk into the mic.
I'm talking in a mic. So, just thanks, everybody. I think we have a great group here, and I'd like to continue it and be a part of it.
And you finally learned my name. You finally learned my name.
Yeah, finally.
Tim, Mark? Hearing none, may I have a motion for adjournment?
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
It's been moved and properly second that the meeting of June 8th be adjourned. All in favor? Aye.
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 Meeting's adjourned. Thanks.
Any pictures that have been taken are confiscated at the door.